Last September, I dumped out 3 burlap sacks in my driveway and weighed what came out: 51 pounds of potatoes. The sacks cost me about $3 a piece at the feed store in Berlin. The seed potatoes came from what I'd saved the year before. Total cash outlay, start to finish, was under $10. Now, you will not find this method in any university extension bulletin printed after about 1955. I checked. The commercial potato industry spent 2 decades after the war pushing growers toward mechanized field production, and the small-scale stacking methods got quietly written out of the literature. Daniel showed me the technique on his farm 3 years ago. Stay with me to the end, because I will share the one amendment I add to each sack that nobody at the extension office mentions. Now, I want to be honest with you. For the first 30 years I gardened on this property, I grew potatoes the way the extension office told me to grow them. Long rows in the main bed, hilling with the hoe twice a season, maybe 40 pounds off a 60-foot row if everything went right. That is what the bulletins recommended, and that is what I did. It wasn't wrong. It was just optimized for a different scale than mine. 3 years ago, I was over at Daniel's farm. Daniel is an old-order Amish farmer about 4 miles from my place outside Berlin, and I walked around the back of his barn looking for him. He wasn't there. What was there were 3 burlap sacks stacked against the south wall, chest high, with potato foliage spilling out the top. I had walked past that barn 100 times and never noticed. When Daniel came around the corner, I asked him what those were. He told me, in that matter-of-fact way he has, that this was how his grandfather grew potatoes when the family had only an acre tillable. He didn't think it was unusual. He thought I was the unusual one for not knowing. That night I pulled down the old extension bulletins from the shelf in my garage. Some of those go back to the 1940s. The pre-1955 publications discuss vertical hilling and small-scale stacking methods plainly. The post-1955 ones do not. They vanish. The 1947 USDA Yearbook of Agriculture marks the pivot. That document, paired with the consolidation of the certified seed potato programs in Idaho and Maine, put the whole industry on a track toward mechanized row production between 1945 and 1965. Stacking has no tractor equivalent, so stacking left the literature. What gardeners lost was not small. We lost the ability to grow 50-plus pounds of potatoes from 12 square feet of driveway space with no tilling, no fertilizer purchases, and no certified commercial seed. Cash outlay under $10. That is what I want to walk you through now. All right, let us go through the method. I will do it in 4 layers because that is how I learned it. First, what it is, then how it works, then the numbers, and finally the small details that separate a 50-pound harvest from a 10-pound harvest. The first layer is what the method actually is: 3 burlap sacks. I buy mine at the feed store in Berlin for about $3 a piece. They are the standard 30-gallon size. The kind feed comes in woven jute, not plastic. At planting time, in the 3rd week of May, I fold the top of each sack down on itself until the sack is only about 8 inches tall. It looks ridiculous, a short, fat cuff sitting on the driveway. Inside that cuff, I put 4 inches of soil mix, and we will get to the mix in a minute. On top of that, I place 3 seed potato pieces, eyes facing up, evenly spaced. I cover them with another 4 inches of mix. That is the start. 3 sacks, 3 seed pieces each, 9 seed pieces total in 12 square feet of driveway. You will not find this setup illustrated in a single university extension bulletin printed after the Eisenhower administration. I checked. Plenty of bulletins on raised beds. Plenty on grow bags as a novelty for apartment patios. Nothing that takes the burlap sack method seriously as a yield-producing technique. That is not an accident. The second layer is the mechanism, why this works at all, and why small-scale stacking outperforms a flat row when you measure on a square-foot basis. A potato plant produces tubers along the stem above the seed piece, but only along the portion of the stem that is buried. In a flat row, you can hill maybe 6 inches of stem before the hill collapses. In a sack, you can bury 30 inches of stem progressively as the plant grows. 30 inches of buried stem, 3 plants per sack, 3 sacks. The tuber-bearing zone multiplies vertically. That is the whole secret. Now the burlap matters too. Burlap breathes, which keeps the soil oxygenated and prevents the tuber rot you get in a sealed plastic bucket. Burlap drains, which means a heavy summer rain runs through instead of pooling. And burlap warms. The dark woven fiber absorbs sun, and the soil inside a sack runs 4 to 6 degrees warmer than the soil in a row at the same time of year, which extends the season on both ends. None of those three properties, breathing, draining, warming, show up in a tractor's economics. A tractor needs flat ground and bulk tonnage. Stacking doesn't fit, and the bulletins after 1955 simply stopped covering it. The third layer is the timing and the numbers. In Zone 6A here in Holmes County, my last frost is around May 5 to May 10th. I plant the sacks 2 weeks after that, so May 18th to May 20th. 3 seed pieces per sack, 4 inches of mix on top. Then I wait. The foliage emerges in about 10 days. When the green growth is 6 to 8 inches above the current soil line, I unroll the sack 1 cuff. That brings me up about 4 inches of sack height, and I backfill with soil and chopped straw mix until only the top 2 inches of foliage are showing. I leave those 2 inches of leaf above the soil because the plant needs to keep photosynthesizing. Then I wait 2 to 3 weeks. The plant grows another 6 to 8 inches. I unroll again. I backfill again. By mid-July, the sack is at full height, about 30 inches. The foliage flowers. Then I leave it alone. Late September, the foliage yellows and dies back, and that is harvest day. I lay a tarp on the driveway, tip the sack, and the potatoes roll out with the soil. Last September, that gave me about 17 pounds from each sack, 51 pounds across the 3. The varieties matter less than people think. I run 2 Yukon Gold sacks, and 1 sack of a fingerling Daniel saves year to year from his own seed stock. Both varieties produced well. 51 pounds, 12 square feet. Under $10 cash. That is exactly the kind of yield per square foot calculation the post-war bulletin stopped publishing. The fourth layer is where I lost 2 seasons in my experiment patch before I figured it out. The soil mix matters more than the variety, more than the timing, more than almost anything else. My mix is 50% finished compost, 30% native silt loam from my own beds, and 20% chopped straw. That is it, not potting soil. Do not use potting soil. I tried potting soil my first season because I assumed lighter and fluffier was better. What the back of the bag promised. The mix compacted in the sack by mid-July, the tubers couldn't size up properly, and I pulled out maybe 4 pounds per sack. The straw is the key. Chopped straw keeps the mix airy all the way through September, which is when the tubers are doing their final sizing. Compost feeds. Silt loam holds moisture without going sour. Straw keeps it loose. The other detail is watering. Once the foliage is up, never water from the top. Water at the base of the sack only. I push the hose down to the bottom of the cuff and run it slowly. Water from the top compacts the surface, which seals off the air the burlap is supposed to be letting in. 2 seasons of mistakes in the experiment patch taught me that. And again, none of this is in the bulletins. Mechanization couldn't standardize a recipe like 50-30-20 for tractor-scale operations, so the recipe quietly disappeared. If you are finding this useful and you want more deep dives into what the Amish know that most modern gardeners have forgotten, subscribe. Daniel's box tower carrots and his straw mound sweet potatoes are next. The same small footprint vertical principle applied to other root crops. Go ahead and tap subscribe right now. I'll wait, no rush. Now, let me come back to the question of why this method got buried, because it is fair to ask, and I want to be honest with you, that this is not a story of villains. 3 forces moved together between roughly 1945 and 1965, and the result was that the small-scale stacking method became invisible. The first force was the USDA's post-war push toward mechanization. The 1947 Yearbook of Agriculture set the direction. Extension bulletins were rewritten over the following decade to support row cropping with tractors and chemical fertilizer. That made sense at the scale the country needed to feed. A tractor cannot stack a burlap sack. A tractor cannot progressively unroll a cuff every 2 weeks. So the methods that did not fit the tractor got dropped from the recommended practices, not because anyone decided to suppress them, but because the literature was being optimized for one specific scale. The second force was the consolidation of certified seed potato programs in Idaho and Maine. Before the war, every county had small seed potato growers. After the war, the certification program scaled up to support industrial growers and backyard seed saving, which is exactly what the sack method encourages because Daniel saves his fingerlings year to year, became invisible to the marketing chain. If you were not buying certified seed in 50-pound bags, you did not exist as a customer. Extension followed the customer. The third force is the one in the title of this video. Grocery chain consolidation in the 1950s and 1960s, led by chains like A&P, demanded uniform-size russets for retail bagging. Those 5-pound mesh bags on the shelf, every potato roughly the same size, every bag roughly the same weight. That retail format does not tolerate variability. The sack method produces a range of sizes. Large potatoes near the top of the sack where the late-season soil had time to size them. Smaller ones toward the bottom. For a household, that range is ideal. Bakers, boilers, and seed pieces for next year, all from the same sack. For a retail SKU, that range is useless. So the method that fed families efficiently became commercially invisible. I want to acknowledge the counterargument honestly. Mechanization fed millions of people. Grocery consolidation lowered food prices. This is not a story of malice. It is a story of optimization for one scale at the cost of another. But the cost is real. I spent 35 years buying potatoes I could have grown myself in 12 square feet of driveway. 2 generations of American gardeners learned only what extension taught. And what extension taught was the tractor's recipe. Now to the amendment I promised at the start, the one thing I add to each sack that the extension bulletins do not mention. It is dried, crushed comfrey leaf. About 2 cups per sack, layered in between the second and third soil additions, which in my schedule lands in late June, right when the plants are flowering and the tubers are beginning to set. The mechanism is straightforward biology. Comfrey grows a taproot that goes down 4 to 6 feet into subsoil most other plants cannot reach. It mines potassium from down there and concentrates it in the leaves. When you crush dry comfrey leaf and bury it in the sack, it breaks down on roughly the same timeline that potato tubers are sizing, late June through August, and it releases that potassium directly into the rooting zone, which is exactly where and when the plant wants it. I grow a single Bocking 14 comfrey patch behind my compost bins for this purpose. Bocking 14 is the sterile cultivar, so it does not spread by seed. I cut it 3 times a season, dry the leaves on a screen in the garage, and store them in a paper bag. I picked up the practice from Daniel's wife, Rebecca. She dries comfrey for tea, and one summer I saw the dried leaves hanging in her summer kitchen and asked about them. The reason no extension bulletin recommends comfrey is simple. It is not a standardized commercial input. It has no NPK label, no truckload pricing, no certified supplier. It cannot be sold at scale, so it never entered the recommended amendment lists. That is the kind of free, propagatable, household scale input that disappears from a literature optimized for commercial inputs. I have got more from my Lancaster County visits coming. I went out last fall and spent 4 days with growers there comparing their potato methods to Daniel's, including the pit storage techniques they use for keeping the harvest through winter without electricity. Subscribe and I will walk you through them. Tap that now. Take your time. I'll be right here. So that is 51 pounds of potatoes from 3 burlap sacks, the comfrey amendment that nobody at the extension office mentions, and a method the post-war literature quietly stopped printing. Done on a driveway for under $10. Now you have a system that does not need a tractor, a tilled field, or a single sentence of permission from the bulletins. Next time I will walk you through Rebecca's pit storage method for keeping that harvest through winter with no electricity at all. Drop a note in the comments and let me know how it goes. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.